Let's take a journey into the past and see the faithful leading of the Lord. It all began in 1899 when the Lord laid upon the heart of C. Clay Green a need for a gospel work in the vicinity of 25th and York Street. After much prayer, a small group of Christians under his leadership began a teaching ministry in a small house located at 2329 North 25th Street. Bethel Sunday School, or the 25th Street Mission, as it was first known, was organized in March 19, 1899, with 32 pupils attending. A few weeks later, a New Testament church was organized, and Brother C. Clay Green was chosen as pastor. In 5 months, the ministry had outgrown its original rooms, so it was meeting in basically a house, so renovations were made to increase the space for the meetings. After 7 fruitful years, ground was bought on York Street below 25th Street, and a chapel was erected. The new chapel was named Bethel Chapel, which means House of God, and it held its first service on November 21, 1906. In this tiny chapel, a simple gospel was preached, and men and women and children came to a realization of their need of Christ. In the ensuing months, God led Pastor Green to give up his grocery business and devote full-time to the ministry. A lot of this must have came from Ruth. I don't know if some of you remember Ruth Leisinger. She was our organist for umpteen years, and Brother Green was her grandfather. As you entered the chapel, there was a sign which read, "Think, what would Jesus do?" A hand fan was handed to you in the summertime. In the winter, you would be warmed by heat pouring forth from 2 pot-belly coal-burning stoves on each side of the rear of the chapel. Because there were no bathroom facilities, you would have to venture through the yard to the outhouse. Despite what we would call inconveniences today, believers were faithful in attending services. Within the walls of the chapel, lives were being changed and families were coming to Christ. After 20 years, 160 had been baptized, and a Sunday school had grown to a membership of 220 pupils with 15 officers and teachers. And around 1928, they began to look for another location, and they chose Juniata. In 1928, again under God's direction and many hours of prayer, a piece of ground located at the corner of K and Lycoming Streets in Juniata Park was purchased. While services continued at the York Street location, a house at 4038 O Street was rented and Sunday school classes were held on Sunday afternoons. God soon enabled the purchase of a used chapel building, which was moved to the new location site. And one of the members of Bethel at that time was a carpenter, and he apparently oversaw the moving of this building to this current location. Many from the congregation on York Street continued their attendance and support of the new location. The tiny chapel on York Street eventually was sold, and to this day it's still an active church. Juniata in the year 1928 was not as we know it. To the north was just open fields, just a lot of sunflowers and open fields. In 1936, God took Pastor Green home to be with himself. By this time, Bethel was a rapidly growing church and Sunday school. God was truly blessing his work. So in 1937, God brought Algernon Jackson, we used to know him Al, to pastor the congregation. Prior to being called to Bethel, he was a milkman. When I was a little boy, milk and bread they were all delivered to your home. In Pastor Jackson's day, they would have driven a horse-drawn wagon. In 1943, the mortgage on this chapel was paid off, and they had a celebration at the Whittier Hotel. By this time, Bethel was bursting at the seams. There was a real need for more Sunday school facilities and a larger church. A room was added to the side of the chapel, and a portion of the basement was excavated and finished for Sunday school rooms, which is our current nursery. So if you wonder why that's not at the same level as the rest of the basement, it was because the men of the church, by hand with buckets, went under there and dug that out. So maybe it was around that time that they added the side room one. I remember the side room. The choir would kind of sing from that area. And in the Sunday evenings, they had an orchestra, and they would all be in that side of the church. And violins, trumpets. My dad and my aunt played the banjo, mandolins, whatever you played. They kind of let you go, Pastor Jackson served faithfully as the under shepherd here until he was led by the Lord to pastor a church in Arlington, Virginia, named Cherrydale Baptist. Pastor Jackson was a very kind, very slow, soft-spoken man, and some of the testimonials just speak lovingly of him. I don't remember a great deal. I do remember him, but I was, 9, 10 years old when things just don't click when you're that age, So he went on to a new ministry, and even when he was with us at 88, he was then pastoring a church, Bethel Baptist Church in Great Falls, Virginia. And we got a letter that he had been in an automobile accident of some sort, and the car had gone into, it was a river or a stream. Kind of funny, but the interesting thing was his main concern of getting out of the car in the water was he was holding his Bible up because he had so many notes and things in his Bible that he didn't want to lose that. And so where his heart was. After Brother Jackson, Reverend Anthony Cuneo was called as pastor, and he only served here for about a year and a half. After Pastor Cuneo left, the Lord brought us an interim pastor named Gordon Sepperly from Philadelphia College of Bible. In 1955, in December 1955, God sent Reverend Robert Thefford to continue the ministry. Because of continued growth, construction of our present sanctuary was begun in 1956. To reduce the cost of construction, the men of the church worked tirelessly. Our present church was erected, so they built this church over top of the existing church. I don't know if you can visualize a church within this building. There were some notes from Grace Rowe and Art. It said that the men worked from 6 o'clock till midnight every night for 2 weeks to dismantle the old building. In 1966, Pastor Thefford felt called, and he left the ministry here and went back to his home area, which was Memphis, Tennessee, to pastor a church. In September of 1966, Blair Hills, who had been serving as the superintendent of the Helping Hand Mission, was called as pastor. Under his leadership, a bus ministry was begun to reach out to the unsaved. During his ministry, some major construction work was required to the front of the building. Pastor Hill's ministry continued until 1976. In the fall of 1976, as we were searching for a new pastor, the Lord directed Reverend Robert Boyd to serve as interim pastor. Then Reverend Harley Toller was here just for a short time in July of 79. He only stayed till November. He wasn't from a city background, and he just really had trouble adjusting to the city. So, and then we called John Clemens to be interim. He served until 1981, and then Pastor Law. We called Pastor Law to Bethel. He had been a visitation pastor up at Ben Salem Baptist. Pastor Law was with us until the spring of '92. One of the things that happened while Pastor Law was here, he did a lot of work on the building, put the roof on. He was he grew up on a farm, and he was very handy that way. But he started a school here, and at one time we had a Bethel Christian Academy. That lasted for about 11 years. Following Pastor Law, we had Reverend Dr. Donald McCullough from Philadelphia College of Bible, the interim. And then in October of 1902, Pastor Scudder and his family accepted the call and came here. Leaving a pastorate in Plymouth, North Carolina, he and his family made the transition to this inner city ministry. I know that was a big adjustment to them. We had sent them a video walking through the parsonage to kind of give them a flavor for the house, and it was kind of hard, I'm sure, to visualize that, but they came up to visit, and here they are. We just need to be conscious that, our lives are testimonies, and not only before our children, but just others that we come in contact with, and it's just evident in a lot of the material that you can read from the history. So I trust, if nothing else, that you take that with you, that people see your life, and you can be a testimony. And we just encourage our pastors to preach the word faithfully week after week. God's been very gracious to us. We have a building, but really the church is not the building. It's you and I, and people that make up the church. And there's been many faces that have come through these doors over the years, and God has used them greatly. Many people have prayed a great deal, and I was reminded this week of a verse in Mark 10:27, the latter part of the verse where it says, "For all things are possible with God." And as we look back at what God has done over the years, I trust that you'll see that today.
The reason why there's an outpost for the gospel in Juniata is because there are a lot of people who've gone before us who have sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears and prayers so that we can have this here. The very pew that you're sitting on was paid for by somebody else. And it reminded me that if the gospel outpost here is going to continue, we're going to have to continue sacrificing for Christ. We're going to have to continue with blood, sweat, tears, and prayers as well. We have a wonderful heritage. God has blessed us here in some amazing ways, but He blessed us because He sent people who had a heart for Christ here and a desire for the gospel to go forward. So let's not take lightly what we have. Let's appreciate what God has provided for us. And let's realize that if it's going to continue, it's going to take us being willing to sacrifice, being willing to do the hard thing and do the right thing for Christ. And I know that God will bless if we'll continue that purpose and meaning that Christ has given for us. So look for ways to serve God. Look for ways to sacrifice for Christ and to see how He can use you so that if the Lord tarries in later years, they can look back at this time in the history of Bethel and look back at people who sacrificially gave for the gospel to go forward here. And I hope that we can be a part of this heritage as well.